You've been told your whole life that being a good person protects you. That kindness is a shield. That virtue is its own reward. And while you were busy being good, the people who actually run your life were busy being effective. They don't believe in good. They believe in what works. And what works has never been the same thing as what's nice. Here's the uncomfortable truth that most people never internalize. Cruelty used well is more merciful than excessive compassion that leads to greater suffering later. Let that sit for a moment. Because this single idea, if you actually understand it, will rewire every decision you make from this moment forward. Machiavelli understood something that most people still refuse to accept. He saw that the person who tries to be compassionate to everyone ends up being cruel to everyone, because their weakness invites chaos, and chaos always produces more victims than a single decisive act of severity ever would. The ruler who hesitates to punish one traitor ends up watching 100 innocent people suffer the consequences of that hesitation. The parent who can't bear to discipline their child raises a tyrant. The leader who won't fire a toxic employee poisons an entire team. Your compassion, when it's misplaced, doesn't prevent suffering. It postpones it and amplifies it. But here's where it gets complicated. Because Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world, sitting on a throne that should have corrupted anyone who touched it, believed the opposite. He believed that inner virtue and equanimity were the only true sources of durable power. He believed that cruelty corrodes the person who wields it, even when it works. He believed that a man who can master himself has no need to master others through fear. So who's right? The man who says calculated cruelty wins, or the man who says stoic virtue wins? The answer is going to sound like a contradiction, and that's exactly why most people never figure it out. They are both right. And the person who learns to hold both truths simultaneously, without the contradiction destroying them, becomes something that most humans will never understand, let alone compete with. Here are 7 principles that will show you how to be ruthless in action and composed in spirit at the same time. 7 tests that separate the person who uses severity strategically from the person whose cruelty is just insecurity wearing a mask. Number 1. Stop confusing niceness with goodness. Most people think they're being good when they're actually just being nice. And niceness is not goodness. Niceness is the fear of conflict dressed up as morality. You smile at someone you despise because you don't want the awkwardness of honesty. You agree with a bad idea because you don't want to be the difficult one. You tolerate disrespect because confronting it would feel mean. And you tell yourself you're being kind. You're not. You're being a coward and calling it virtue. Machiavelli would have seen through you in a second. He didn't care about being liked. He cared about being effective. And he noticed something that should disturb you. The leaders who were most obsessed with being seen as compassionate were usually the ones who caused the most destruction, because their need to appear kind made them incapable of making hard decisions at the moment when hard decisions were cheap. So they waited. And waiting always makes the decision more expensive. Real goodness is not the absence of conflict. Real goodness is the willingness to do the difficult thing that prevents worse suffering down the line. The surgeon who cuts into your body is not being cruel. The surgeon who refuses to operate because they can't stand the sight of blood, that person is cruel. They're just cruel in a way that looks gentle. You've been paying the cost of this confusion your whole life and you probably haven't noticed. Every time you chose niceness over honesty, you eroded a relationship that could have been real. Every time you tolerated bad behavior to avoid being the bad guy, you taught someone that their bad behavior has no consequences. And every time you told yourself you were taking the high road, you were actually taking the easy road and rebranding it. Strategic people understand the difference. Nice people avoid conflict. Good people enter conflict deliberately, because they know that a small fire extinguished early prevents the inferno that burns everything down later. Number 2. Learn the difference between cruelty that serves your position and cruelty that serves your ego. This is the test that separates the Machiavellian from the merely cruel. And most people fail it. Because cruelty feels powerful, and power is addictive, and once you get a taste of making someone flinch, it's very easy to convince yourself that every flinch you produce is strategic. It's not. Most of the cruelty people inflict on each other has nothing to do with strategy. It has to do with insecurity. The boss who humiliates an employee in front of the team isn't maintaining discipline. He's feeding a hunger inside himself that can never be filled. The partner who punishes you with silence for days isn't teaching you a lesson. They're proving to themselves that they matter. The friend who makes a cutting remark at your expense isn't sharpening your awareness. They're dulling their own pain by transferring it to you. Machiavelli's insight was not that cruelty is good. His insight was that cruelty used well is more merciful than compassion that fails. And the key word is well. Cruelty used well means cruelty used once, decisively, at the precise moment when it prevents greater harm, and then set aside. The ruler who executes a conspirator swiftly and publicly does it once, and the message prevents a dozen future conspiracies. The ruler who tortures people for sport creates a dozen future conspirators. Here's how you test yourself. Before you act with severity, ask one question. Am I doing this to prevent a specific, predictable harm, or am I doing this to make myself feel bigger? If the answer is the second one, you're not being Machiavellian. You're being fragile. And fragility disguised as strength is the most dangerous thing a person can carry, because it guarantees that you'll keep hurting people, not because the situation demands it, but because your ego demands it, and your ego is insatiable. The cost of getting this wrong is enormous. Cruelty that serves your position earns respect, even if it earns fear. Cruelty that serves your ego earns rebellion, because people will tolerate severity from someone they believe is acting with purpose. They will never tolerate cruelty from someone they believe is acting from insecurity. And they can always tell the difference, even if they can't articulate why. Think about the people in your life who you've watched wield power. The ones you respected, even when they were hard on you, were the ones whose severity felt purposeful. You might not have liked it in the moment, but you understood it. The ones you resented, the ones you eventually turned against, were the ones whose harshness felt personal. Felt arbitrary. Felt like it was really about them, not about the situation. That difference is everything. And if you can't distinguish it in yourself, you will become the person people resent, not the person people respect. Number 3. Master the art of the single decisive blow. Machiavelli said something that sounds brutal but is actually the most compassionate advice you'll ever receive if you understand it correctly. He said that injuries should be done all at once, so that being tasted less, they give less offense. Benefits should be granted little by little, so that they are savored more. Think about what this means in your life. When you have to end a relationship, do you do it cleanly and completely, or do you let it drag on for months while you slowly withdraw, leaving the other person in a state of perpetual confusion? When you have to confront someone about a pattern that's destroying your trust, do you lay it out directly and completely, or do you drop hints and make passive-aggressive comments and hope they figure it out? Most people dole out their injuries in installments, and each installment is a small wound that never quite heals before the next one arrives. They think they're being gentle. They're actually being torturous. A clean break hurts intensely for a short time and then begins to heal. A slow erosion hurts moderately for a very long time and leaves scars that never fully close. The same principle applies in reverse. When you give someone a gift, don't give them 10 gifts at once. Give them one gift, let them appreciate it, and then give another later. When you show someone kindness, don't empty your entire reservoir in a single gesture. Let each act of generosity land separately so that each one is felt. People who give everything at once are forgotten. People who give consistently over time are irreplaceable. This is not just strategy. This is the architecture of human perception. We feel sharp changes more than gradual ones. A single decisive action, whether it's a confrontation, a boundary, or a consequence, registers clearly and becomes part of the landscape. A series of small, hesitant actions registers as noise and gets ignored. If you want people to take you seriously, stop issuing warnings in installments. Deliver the message once, with full clarity, and then let your silence do the rest. Silence after severity is one of the most powerful tools you possess. Most people can't handle it. They deliver the blow and then immediately try to soften it, explain it, justify it. They send a follow-up message. They check in. They want to make sure the person isn't too upset. And in doing so, they undo the very thing they just accomplished. The severity becomes negotiable. The boundary becomes porous. The consequence becomes a suggestion. Strategic people deliver the blow and then go quiet. They let the silence hold the message in place. They let the other person sit with it, process it, and come to terms with it on their own. That silence is not cruelty. It is respect for the clarity of the message. Number 4. Become emotionally detached from the outcome. This is where Machiavelli and Marcus Aurelius converge, and it's the point that most people find almost impossible to accept. Both of them, coming from completely different directions, arrived at the same conclusion. You cannot be effective if you are emotionally fused with the outcome of your actions. Machiavelli said you must do what the situation requires, whether it calls for the lion's force or the fox's cunning, and you must not be sentimental about it. Marcus Aurelius said you must do what is right because it is right, and accept whatever follows, whether it's praise or punishment, success or failure, with complete equanimity. Different philosophies. Same destination. The person who can act without being emotionally enslaved by the result of the action is the person who can see clearly, decide cleanly, and move without hesitation. Most people can't do this. They act, and then they wait anxiously for the response. They deliver a consequence and then spend the next 3 days wondering if they were too harsh. They set a boundary and then feel guilty when the other person gets upset. They make a decision and then immediately second-guess it because someone disapproved. This is emotional fusion with the outcome, and it makes you weak. Not because you care, but because your caring is so loud that it drowns out your judgment. The strategic person acts and releases. They make the decision, deliver the consequence, set the boundary, and then they let go. Not because they don't care about what happens, but because they understand that their attachment to the outcome gives other people power over them. The moment you need someone to respond well to your boundary, they control you, because they can withhold the response you need. The moment you need someone to understand why you acted with severity, they control you, because they can refuse to understand. Emotional detachment from the outcome is not coldness. It's freedom. It's the freedom to act correctly even when acting correctly is unpopular. It's the freedom to be the person who makes the hard call while everyone else is still deliberating. And it's the freedom to sleep at night after making that call, because you know you did what the situation required, not what your anxiety demanded. Marcus Aurelius sat on his throne and wrote notes to himself about not being disturbed by the opinions of others. Not because he was above caring, but because he understood that a ruler who is swayed by approval and disapproval is not a ruler at all. He is a servant of the crowd. And Machiavelli, from his very different vantage point, said essentially the same thing. The prince who is emotionally attached to being loved will make decisions that win love but lose territory. The prince who is emotionally attached to being feared will make decisions that generate fear but breed conspiracy. Only the prince who is attached to neither, who does what the moment demands and moves on, can maintain his position. The cost of not mastering this is that you remain perpetually reactive. Every decision you make is contaminated by the question of how it will be received. Every action is diluted by your need for it to be understood. And so you never act with full force. You never speak with full honesty. You never set a boundary that isn't already half collapsed before it leaves your mouth. The world feels this hesitation in you, and it responds to it by not taking you seriously. Because the world does not take seriously the person who is constantly checking to see if the world takes them seriously. Number 5. Recognize that moralizing is a strategy, and it's usually the worst one. Here's something that will make some people uncomfortable. When you moralize, when you lecture someone about what they should have done, when you explain to them why their actions were wrong and yours were right, you are not being virtuous. You are deploying a strategy. And it happens to be one of the weakest strategies available to you. Moralizing is the strategy of people who lack the power to act. Think about it. The person who has real power doesn't need to explain why what you did was wrong. They simply respond with a consequence. The person who has no power writes a long message about how disappointed they are. The person who has real authority doesn't argue about fairness. They simply change the conditions. The person who has no authority complains about unfairness to anyone who will listen. Both Machiavelli and Marcus Aurelius saw through moralizing, though they came at it from different angles. Machiavelli saw that moralizing is useless as a tool of power because people don't change their behavior because you explain to them why it's wrong. They change their behavior because the consequences of continuing have become unacceptable. Marcus Aurelius saw that moralizing is useless as a tool of virtue because telling other people how to live is a distraction from the only project that matters, which is mastering yourself. When you moralize, you give away your power in two ways. First, you reveal that you need the other person to understand and agree with your judgment. You need their validation. You need them to say, "You're right, I was wrong." And until they do, you remain stuck. Second, you waste energy that you could be spending on action. Every minute you spend explaining to someone why they're wrong is a minute you could have spent changing the conditions so that their wrong behavior no longer affects you. The strategic person doesn't moralize. They adjust. Someone disrespects them repeatedly, they don't write a paragraph about respect. They remove that person's access to their life. Someone betrays their trust, they don't deliver a lecture about loyalty. They recalibrate the relationship so that betrayal is no longer possible, or they end it. The message is delivered not through words but through changed conditions. And changed conditions teach faster than any lecture ever could. This is hard for most people because moralizing feels righteous. It feels like you're standing up for something. But standing up for something without acting on it is just performance. And the people around you can sense the difference between someone who is performing virtue and someone who is living it. The performer talks. The practitioner moves. And when the practitioner moves, the performer looks ridiculous by comparison. Number 6. Hold the lion and the fox simultaneously, and never let either one fully take over. Machiavelli's most famous insight, the one that has survived 500 years and still makes people uncomfortable, is that a prince must be both the lion and the fox. The lion can fight off wolves but cannot recognize traps. The fox can recognize traps but cannot fight off wolves. Rely on only one, and you will be destroyed by the thing the other one handles. Most people are either a lion or a fox. They're either the person who charges in with force and directness, handling every situation with blunt confrontation, which works beautifully until they meet someone who's more cunning than they are and walks them into a trap. Or they're the person who's always maneuvering, always reading the room, always playing the angle, which works beautifully until they meet someone who simply overpowers them with direct force and they have no capacity to resist. The strategic person is both. They can be direct when directness serves the moment and subtle when subtlety serves the moment. They can be warm and approachable in one interaction and cold and unreachable in the next, not because they're inconsistent, but because they're reading the terrain and adapting to it. This is not two-faced. This is intelligent. The mountain doesn't have one shape. It has the shape that the situation requires. But here's the part that most people miss. You can hold both natures without being destroyed by either, but only if you have the Stoic foundation underneath. Marcus Aurelius provides the anchor. Without inner equanimity, without a stable core that is not disturbed by external events, the lion and the fox will tear you apart. The lion's aggression will become who you are, and you'll become a bully. The fox's cunning will become who you are, and you'll become a manipulator. Only the person whose center is still, whose inner world is governed by virtue and reason rather than by appetite and fear, can wield both natures without being consumed by either. This is the synthesis that most people never reach. They think they have to choose. Be Machiavellian or be Stoic. Be effective or be good. Be the lion or the fox. The people who actually run the world don't choose. They hold all of it at once. They are ruthless in their actions and composed in their spirits. They are calculating in their strategy and virtuous in their character. They are the lion when the wolves come and the fox when the traps appear, and when neither is needed, they are simply still. The stillness is what makes everything else possible. Without it, the lion and the fox are just two forms of desperation. With it, they become instruments of a mind that is not shaken by what it encounters. The stillness is not passivity. It is the highest form of readiness. A still lake reflects everything perfectly. A turbulent lake reflects nothing accurately. Be the still lake, and from that stillness, deploy whatever the moment requires. Number 7. Know when severity serves you and when it reveals you. This is the most important principle, and it's the one that separates mastery from self-destruction. Because everything we've discussed, calculated cruelty, decisive action, emotional detachment, the lion and the fox, all of it can be used by a master or abused by a coward. And the difference is not in the technique. The difference is in the person wielding it. Marcus Aurelius would ask you a question that you should carry with you for the rest of your life. He would ask whether your severity is coming from a place of strength or a place of fear. When you cut someone off, is it because the relationship genuinely no longer serves either of you, or is it because you're afraid of being vulnerable? When you deliver a harsh truth, is it because the person needs to hear it, or is it because you enjoy the feeling of being the one who tells it? When you withhold forgiveness, is it because forgiveness would enable further harm, or is it because holding the grudge gives you a sense of control? Severity that comes from strength is brief, purposeful, and followed by a return to calm. The storm passes and the sky clears. Severity that comes from fear is chronic, escalating, and never followed by peace. The storm becomes the climate. And everyone around you can feel the difference, even if they can't name it. Here's the test. After you act with severity, do you feel larger or smaller? Do you feel composed or agitated? Do you feel like you've done something necessary, or do you feel like you've proven something? If you feel like you've proven something, you haven't acted strategically. You've acted desperately. And desperation, no matter how well it's dressed up, always reveals itself. Machiavelli would tell you that the prince who needs to prove his power has already lost it. The prince who simply has power doesn't need to demonstrate it at every opportunity. His severity is rare enough to be shocking when it appears, and that rarity is what gives it force. The prince who is severe constantly desensitizes everyone around him, and eventually, they stop fearing him and start planning. So ask yourself, in your own life, when was the last time you acted with real severity, and what was driving it? Was it a clear-eyed assessment of what the situation required, or was it the howl of an ego that felt small and needed to make someone else feel smaller? Be honest. Because this is the test that determines whether you're becoming dangerously clever or just becoming dangerous. And the difference matters. One builds an empire. The other builds a prison and puts you inside it. Now let me bring this together, because the synthesis is everything. Machiavelli and Marcus Aurelius are not opposites. They look like opposites if you read them shallowly. One seems to advocate ruthlessness. The other seems to advocate gentleness. But if you go deeper, you see that they're describing two halves of the same complete person. Machiavelli is talking about the exterior. How you engage with the world. How you handle threats. How you navigate an environment that does not care about your goodness and will exploit your weakness. He's describing the armor. Marcus Aurelius is talking about the interior. How you govern yourself. How you maintain your center when everything around you is chaos. How you prevent the armor from becoming your skin. He's describing what's underneath the armor. The person who has only Machiavelli becomes hollow. They win battles but lose themselves. They become so focused on effectiveness that they forget why they wanted to be effective in the first place. They gain power but have no inner ground to stand on, and so the power becomes the only thing they have, and they'll do anything to keep it, including things that destroy the very person they were before they started seeking power. The person who has only Marcus Aurelius becomes a saint in a world that eats saints. They maintain their inner peace while the world takes everything from them. They are virtuous and they are serene and they are completely unable to protect themselves or the people they care about from predation. Their goodness is real but it is also defenseless, because they refuse to pick up the tools that would allow them to protect it. The person who holds both becomes something that almost no one understands. They are serene inside and formidable outside. They are virtuous in their core and ruthless in their actions when ruthlessness is what the moment demands. They do not enjoy cruelty, but they do not flinch from it when it prevents greater cruelty. They do not seek power for its own sake, but they do not apologize for wielding it when the situation calls for it. They are the person who can sit in perfect stillness and then, when the moment requires, move with a precision that takes everyone by surprise. This is the paradox that you need to internalize. Calculated cruelty and stoic virtue are not enemies. They are allies. Cruelty without virtue is just brutality. Virtue without the capacity for severity is just fragility. But cruelty governed by virtue, severity held within the container of equanimity, that is something else entirely. That is the ruthless art Machiavelli perfected, held in the steady hands that Marcus Aurelius described. Let me say that again, because it's the heart of everything. Cruelty used well is more merciful than excessive compassion that leads to greater suffering later. That is not a license to be cruel. It is a demand to be wise. It is the recognition that avoiding necessary pain does not eliminate pain. It merely redirects it to people who are less prepared to bear it, and it delays it until it has grown larger than your capacity to manage it. The person who cannot bear to cause pain will watch pain multiply around them and call themselves innocent. The person who causes pain deliberately, at the right moment, in the right amount, for the right reason, and then returns to stillness, that person is the one who actually reduces the total amount of suffering in the world. And they do it at the cost of being called cruel by people who don't understand what they just prevented. This is the price of mastery. You will be misunderstood. You will be called cold by people who are too warm for their own good. You will be called harsh by people whose softness has never been tested. You will be called calculating by people who have never calculated anything and whose lives are the wreckage of that failure. And you will have to carry that misunderstanding without letting it disturb your center. That is the Stoic part. That is the Marcus Aurelius underneath the Machiavelli. The ability to be misunderstood completely and remain undisturbed completely. So here is your instruction. Stop apologizing for the severity that your life requires. Stop dressing up your weakness as compassion. Stop moralizing when you should be acting. Stop being nice when you should be good. And stop being cruel when your ego demands it, reserving your severity for the moments when it actually serves something larger than your need to feel powerful. Be the lion when the wolves arrive. Be the fox when the traps are set. And when neither is required, be still. Be so still that the people around you forget what you're capable of, until the moment they need to remember. And in that moment, act once, decisively, without hesitation, without apology, and without the need to explain. Because here's what the people who run your life already know, and what you now know too. Being good is not the same as being nice. Being effective is not the same as being cruel. And being powerful is not the same as being feared. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who can be all of these things, at the right time, in the right measure, without ever losing the stillness at their center. That is the ruthless art Machiavelli perfected. Now it is yours. The question is whether you'll use it or whether you'll go back to being nice and call it virtue while the world walks over you. Right now, not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Not when the situation is easier. Right now, in the next decision you face, ask yourself one thing. Am I being good, or am I just being nice? And if the answer is that you're being nice, stop. Do the harder thing. Be the person who can hold severity and serenity in the same hand without trembling. If you understood what we just discussed, if this landed somewhere real, go to the comments and write 3 words. I am untouchable. Not because you're invulnerable. But because you've decided that no situation, no person, and no fear will make you abandon the composure that is your real power. 3 words. I am untouchable. Type it. Mean it. Become it.